Imagine waking up, opening your bank app, and your money is gone, not stolen, not frozen, gone. Because you did not spend it fast enough. That is not a theory. That already happened. In 2023, the Chinese government distributed digital money with an expiration date. If it was not spent within a fixed window, it disappeared. No refund, no warning, no appeal. Let that sink in. Money that punishes you for not spending it. And here's the part most people miss. It worked exactly as intended. More than $2.4 trillion has already moved through this system across 26 cities, with over 260 million digital wallets active right now. This is not a pilot. This is a live national system, serving hundreds of millions of people. But this is not even the most important part, because what matters most is what happened next. When central bankers in the US and Europe saw this system, they did not call it dangerous. They called it instructive. And more than 130 of them went home and started building their own versions. Because what China proved is that programmable money works. And once it works, it spreads. To understand how this even became possible, you have to go back. Because China did not introduce the system into a country that still used cash. That country no longer existed. By 2019, 2 private apps handled about 94% of all mobile payments in China: WeChat Pay and Alipay. Together, they processed over $37 trillion in a single year. Not billions, trillions. Everything ran through a phone, street vendors, taxi drivers, markets, even small shops. Scan, pay, done. And if you tried to use cash, you ran into a problem. Not because it was illegal, because it was useless. Businesses stopped accepting it, registers disappeared, change was no longer kept. Some stores had no way to take cash at all. Think about what that means. Money that still exists, but no longer works, and people accepted it because it was faster, easier, more convenient. But not everyone could adapt. China has hundreds of millions of elderly citizens, people in their 70s and 80s, people who grew up with physical money, people who did not own smartphones, people who never downloaded an app in their life, and suddenly they could not buy groceries without one. They could not pay a doctor. They could not take public transport, not because they had no money, because the system had moved on without them. The Chinese government eventually acknowledged the problem formally. They issued guidelines telling businesses to accept cash. But guidelines are not enforcement. And by then, the infrastructure was already gone. The same thing happened to migrant workers. Millions of people moving between provinces, people without stable bank accounts, people who relied on cash because the digital system required documentation they did not have, suddenly cut off, not by a law, not by a decision, by a system that simply stopped accommodating them. When a payment system becomes this embedded, the people it leaves behind have no recourse, no appeal, no alternative, because convenience has a cost. And when all money flows through a single system, whoever controls that system controls everything. And that is exactly what happened next. In 2020, the People's Bank of China made a decision. They would not improve the system. They would replace it with something they fully controlled, the digital Yuan. Now this is where everything changes, because this is not just digital money. This is programmable money. And that changes the rules completely, because the money you receive is no longer neutral. It comes with instructions. Instructions you did not choose. Instructions you cannot remove. Instructions embedded into the money itself. Now watch what that means. This money can expire, which means you cannot save it unless the system allows it. This money can reject certain purchases, which means you can have the balance and still not be able to spend it. This money can be limited to specific locations, which means you step outside the allowed area and your money stops working. Not taken, not transferred, just unusable. And then there is the part most people ignore. It can be turned off instantly. No court, no delay, no explanation. Because in this system, that is not an emergency feature. That is the design. Now, picture what this looks like in real life. Imagine you receive a government payment. It looks like money. It sits in your wallet like money. But it can only be spent at approved retailers. You cannot use it to pay your landlord. You cannot use it at a private market. You cannot donate it to a cause you believe in. You cannot save it for an emergency next month. Because next month, it will not exist. The government decides what it buys. The government decides where it works. The government decides when it disappears. You're not holding money. You're holding a voucher with terms and conditions you did not agree to and no ability to opt out. Now here's where it becomes real. In 2020, the city of Shenzhen ran a program. 50,000 citizens were selected. Each received 200 digital yuan. There was one condition. They had to spend it within a limited time. Some used it immediately. Some waited. Some forgot. And when the deadline passed, the money vanished. One day it was there. The next day it was zero, no transaction, no refund, no trace. Because it did not go anywhere. The system executed the rule. And that was the end of it. The program was declared a success, so it was repeated. In Suzhou, they tested spending category restrictions. Certain digital money could only be used at specific types of merchants. Groceries, but not electronics. Food, but not clothing. The government decided what was an approved purchase, not the person holding the money. In Beijing, they tested geographic limits, digital funds that worked inside designated districts, and stopped working the moment you crossed the boundary. In multiple cities, they tested instant freezes, wallets made inaccessible within seconds. No process, no review, no warning, just unavailable. Each pilot tested something different. Each one expanded the boundaries of what was possible, and each one worked, which proves something that changes everything. Money is no longer fixed. The rules of money can be rewritten, and once that becomes possible, money is no longer something you control. It becomes something that controls you. Now think about what savings actually means. It is your safety net, your backup plan, your ability to handle a crisis without asking anyone for permission. That concept depends entirely on money staying where you put it, on money existing next month the same way it exists today. Programmable money breaks that assumption completely, because if the system decides you should spend, your savings do not survive. If the system decides you spent on the wrong thing, that transaction gets blocked. If the system decides your access should end, it ends instantly, without warning, without appeal, and you have no cash to fall back on. Because that was already gone, because if money can expire, saving becomes conditional. If money can be restricted, choice becomes conditional. If money can be turned off, access becomes conditional, temporary, conditional, revocable. And then something else happened. The world watched. In 2022, at the Beijing Winter Olympics, China opened the system to international visitors, athletes, journalists, officials from dozens of countries. They used it in real life to pay for food, transportation, services, and it worked seamlessly. Now think about who was watching that. Central bankers, policymakers, decision makers. And when they went home, they did not ask if they should build this. They asked how fast they could. In 2023, the Bank for International Settlements surveyed central banks. More than 93% said they are actively developing digital currencies, not researching, building. More than 130 central banks, many using this exact model. Some countries are already live. The Bahamas, Jamaica, Nigeria, the Eastern Caribbean. Others are preparing for full rollout. The European Central Bank has already set a timeline between 2027 and 2029 across 20 countries, serving over 340 million people. One system, one structure, one authority. And the ECB has already confirmed publicly that the digital euro will include programmable features. They have discussed using programmable money to enforce climate policy, to direct spending toward approved green purchases, to restrict spending on goods deemed harmful. The system does not just track what you buy, it decides what you are allowed to buy. That is not a conspiracy theory. That is a published policy discussion from the European Central Bank. Now, remember what we covered last week. Sweden is already trying to bring cash back, because once cash disappears, there is no easy way back. And that window is already closing. So now the real question, is this coming to the United States? The answer is not simple, because officially, a government digital dollar has been blocked. In 2024, the US Senate voted 89-10 against it, but do not get comfortable, because that does not stop the system. It just changes how it arrives. Because programmable money does not need the government. It can come from banks, from apps, from systems you already use every single day. And this is where most people get it completely wrong. They think this is something in the future. It is not. Right now, your money is already digital. It is not cash. It is numbers, stored in systems you do not own, systems you do not control, systems that have their own rules, rules you agreed to, in terms of service you never read. And those systems already have power over your money. The power to freeze it, the power to block specific transactions, the power to restrict access without a court order, without a hearing, without any obligation to explain why. This is not hypothetical. PayPal has frozen accounts for months at a time. Chase has denied transactions without explanation. Venmo has locked users out of their own funds. All of it perfectly legal, all of it buried in the fine print, and it is only becoming more embedded. In 2025, the US Congress began debating the Genius Act, a bill that would create a legal framework for stablecoins, private digital dollars issued by banks and tech companies, already over $200 billion in circulation. And here is what most coverage missed. Nothing in that bill prevents stablecoins from having programmable features, expiry dates, spending restrictions, geographic limits, the same features China built, available to any private company that issues one. And the infrastructure underneath all of it is already running. FedNow. The Federal Reserve's instant payment system, launched in 2023, operates 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. Every major U.S. bank is connected to it. It was designed to make cash feel unnecessary, and it is working. Zelle processed over $1 trillion in a single year. Venmo has tens of millions of users. Apple Pay is accepted almost everywhere. That is the backbone. The programmable layer gets built on top of it. Not announced, not debated, just added, feature by feature, update by update, until the system you depend on is no longer the system you agreed to. And once cash is gone, really gone, the way it is gone in Sweden, there is no backup, no alternative, no way around a system that has become the only system, which is exactly the moment control becomes permanent. Sweden showed you what happens when cash disappears. China showed you what happens when control replaces it. And what comes next is not happening somewhere else. It is already written, in laws that already exist, in mechanisms already tested, in events that already happened. In 2013, in Cyprus, people woke up and their bank accounts were accessed overnight, up to 47.5% removed from deposits above 100,000 euros. No warning, no vote, no delay. And it was ruled completely legal because of a specific mechanism, one that already exists in American law. Most Americans have never heard of it. It has a name, and it has a reserve fund. As of late 2025, holding $153.9 billion to cover more than $10 trillion in deposits. That is 142 for every $100 of your money. That is next week. And if what China built changes how you think about money, what comes next will change how you think about whether that money is actually yours. Subscribe to Capital Awareness. Turn on notifications. Because what comes next is already law. It has a name. It has a number. And it already happened to an entire country overnight. Sweden warned, China proved, and the law already waiting in America has a precedent. Subscribe now.